Session is all about reframing the past, working with archive. It's one session of today. It's being streamed. We've got some international participants from previous FAMLAB editions viewing this from around the world, and so everyone behave themselves. And we've got a few clips to show you. I need to mention about Slido. If you've got any questions, download the app, put in the number, and we can run those questions to the panel at the end of the session. I'm going to hand you over to Esther Johnson, who's going to host the panel.
Well, welcome everybody. Today it's great to see you all. Today's session, Reframing the Past. As Nigel said, I'm a prof at university. Sheffield Hallam University, just across the way, so it's nice to be here. And I'm an artist and filmmaker myself. I use a lot of archive in my own work, so I'm really delighted to be able to be here with these amazing four artists. We've got some really exciting projects. So we're going to hear a case study about the different projects first, and then we're going to have a discussion afterwards with a few questions and then open the floor. And as Nigel said, just get thinking about your juicy questions so you can send those to Slido. So we're going to start with Rebecca Mark-Lawson, who is a producer. She has a company here in Sheffield called Tyke Films since 2015. And we're going to hear about two projects from Rebecca. So I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Is this on? Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure about case study, but I'm just going to talk about my film. I'm talking about a film called Polystyrene, I'm a Cliche, that was out last year and is available on Sky and all the other platforms. But I'm also working with Dee, who's going to talk about the other project. So yeah, we made a film last year and we started with loads of archives. So we did loads of research, and the final, I think we had hours and hours and hours of archive that we could have used. And then the final film was about 90 minutes and there was 60 minutes of archive in it. So that was a massive challenge for us because we'd shot a lot of the interviews as talking heads so we needed to find stuff to cover that. So archive became our friend, but archive is really hard to work with, obviously. So we had a couple of things that we definitely knew we were going to use. We had BBC footage that she'd done in an arena. So it's about a woman called Polystyrene who's in a band called the X-Ray Specs. And we were working with her daughter Celeste, who co-wrote it and co-directed the film. We were also gifted some unseen archive, and that was an interesting journey as well, so I want to talk a little bit about that. But so we had these kind of major pieces of work that had been done in the 70s. There was an arena programme that was made about her life and her work that we wanted to access. And then obviously there was all the recordings of her performing. So there was Top of the Pops, and then there was, international recordings.
Just for our international audience, can you just say what Arena Top of the Pops is, just for...
Oh yeah, okay, so Arena's a really long-standing arts programme that dives deep into artists in a very different way, so they usually have quite an interesting approach. And you can see that looking back at the Arena that was shot in the 70s. I mean, it's really beautiful, and they had her sitting at a piano and playing a piano and kind of being quite being on her own, whereas all the footage that you find, when she's being attacked by punks and people trying to kiss her and stuff like that. So Arena was really a key piece of work that we wanted to use. It's BBC owned and made, but actually it's not owned by the BBC anymore, it's all owned by Getty. So that was a bit of a challenge, is finding out, who owns the archive and who has the control over that. So that took us about 4 years to find out. So it was a real journey about how to work with archive and how to find and replace stuff as well. So, people were quoting things like £5,000 a minute, and you know, we had 60 minutes of archive to cover, so obviously our original archive bill was coming out at like 200-300 grand. So we had to find innovative and interesting ways of not paying that kind of money. I think one of the things, so there's two things I really want to talk about. First of all is, don't be put off by the price. You know, if you're really keen on it, you can go back. It took us a year to do a deal with Getty. I don't know if they're watching this, probably not. But, you know, we're talking about somebody's life. We're telling somebody's story. They made a programme about her in the 70s. I'm sure they didn't pay her. And now they're telling us we can't use that. Her own daughter is making a film about her. And they're telling us we can't use it unless we give them thousands and thousands of pounds. And to us, that kind of made us a bit angry. And we felt like we had the right to use it. And I kind of feel like that about archive in general. You know, you have a lot of gatekeepers. And as filmmakers, we should be able to use archive to express ourselves and to talk about people's stories and journeys. And so, yeah, we went back and we kept knocking at that door and we didn't take no for an answer. And I think in the end we managed to, we had a lot of arguments and a lot of cases and a lot of emails about why are you not letting this woman tell her mother's story. But yeah, in the end we managed to do the deal. I think we've got, do you want to show something now? So the other side of finding out about somebody's life is uncovering unseen archive, and that's a really beautiful journey. I know you're going to talk a bit more about that later on. We were actually gifted some unseen archive of Polly. Polly had a manager, Polystyrene had a manager who died, and when he died, he'd asked his widow to gift this archive that was found in their cellar. It was like 16mm, 8mm stuff that had never been seen. And so she came and gave it to, do you want to play it? So I can just talk over it anyway. So just don't play sound on it. Okay. And so Celeste had been gifted this archive, so we just kind of started to look back on it, and this is from a Sex Pistols gig that happened in Hastings on her 18th birthday, and he shot it. He shot everything. He was a photographer and a filmmaker as well. So obviously you got the Sex Pistols here. So we actually own this archive, which is incredible, you know, to have that as a gift for a filmmaker. It's a great gift. Obviously we couldn't use the sound because we can't clear the Sex Pistols. So we made our own Sex Pistols song. Can't say that either, obviously, but... so you can see this really beautiful, you know, very early archive that we were gifted. Now, when you're gifted somebody's personal archive, you've got a lot of responsibility with that. And, you know, at one point, the person that owns that archive said to us, you can have this archive, and then we said, okay, have we got permission to use it? And then they went, no, actually we don't want you to have it anymore. You know, it's personal, so they changed their minds about things. So again, that took a lot of work to dig down into what they were happy for us to use. Once we'd done a couple of rough cuts of the film, they realised that we were making a piece from a place of love, and that we weren't trying to exploit people. But yeah, that took quite a lot of work to dig down into the clearance.
Can I just ask about that? Was it something did you talk about showing kind of rough cuts or little clips with the actual archive to kind of gain that trust? Was that something that was talked about up front, or something that you kind of learned as you went along?
Yeah, I mean, generally you try not to let people have approval, but you definitely need to gain trust because you're using something that's very dear to them. So yeah, definitely showing them the kind of work, because most people think you don't know what you're doing anyway, so if you can show them that you know what you're doing and that you're using their archive in a really nice way, then they become interested and allow you. And that archive had actually just been given to John Moores University in Liverpool, so other people are going to be able to use it, hopefully.
And have you talked about how that might work in terms of access through the university, because universities can be another gatekeeper in terms of access to archive material, and whether that will be a monetary exchange for people to be able to use it.
No.
Okay. And this is something I'm really very interested in kind of, that kind of exchange, and also the ethics, kind of using it and the building trust. Did you want to show another clip, or?
No, I'll just move on. I mean, if we run out of something to talk about, we can show something else.
Okay, so let's move on to Christopher Allen.
Oh, hi.
Hi. So Chris is an artist, filmmaker. He's been part of a collaborative project called The Light Surgeons for many years.
Yeah, that's my studio, yeah.
Yeah, and he's going to talk about a project with the BFI.
I'm going to talk about two projects,
yeah, okay.
And give a little bit of background. But yeah, so I'm a creative producer and a director, an audio-visual artist. I work with both music and moving image, and I'm a filmmaker. So thanks for having me. The studio's been around for about 26 years now, and it ranges from installation projects, like this is a thing we did for the Museum of London, which is a film and a piece of software that sits in the middle of the museum, which sadly probably won't be there for that much longer because the museum's about to move, but go and check it out. Is that going to change? Oh, I think we're skipping about now. So we've done a range of these sort of projects with museums, which has sort of led me into this kind of heritage sector, which obviously the link with archive connects. But we also do stuff with technology, projection mapping, more generative and abstract work, which explores sound in different ways. Skipping about, so lots of the projects we do bring together kind of documentary filmmaking with live music and performing, and we perform them live. So they're kind of like the videos mixed live, the music is performed live, and they bring together a lot of kind of, I guess, kind of interviews with different people talking about different subjects that we've gathered. So there's a sort of a kind of journalistic inquiry at the heart of them. This is a project that was commissioned by the British Council in Malaysia, for instance, which is toured. So the thing I'm going to talk a little bit more about in terms of performance is a project we were commissioned to create just before the pandemic with the BFI. We'd worked with the BFI on a bunch of things. We'd done some installations and some performance stuff for their fundraising for their archive, a thing called Luminous. And so they eventually asked us to create a new piece of work, which was commissioned for the Queen Elizabeth Hall. So it was a collaboration with the South Bank Centre, and it was meant to happen as the kind of opening event for their Japan season in 2020. Obviously, slightly kind of bad timing, but we were invited to collaborate with a composer called Midori Takada, who I wasn't really aware of, but she is a bit of a kind of legend in sort of minimal ambient music, a bit like Steve Reich, or I don't know, that's who I could compare her to in terms of her marimba and percussion and stuff. But so we started the journey working with her, and we were given this whole collection of amazing clips, which the BFI were slowly kind of restoring, and sort of getting rid of some of the textures I actually really love. But anyway, there was all these amazing kind of footage, never seen before footage on Japan that the project was based on. Yeah, it had all sorts of stuff on Ainu people, who not many people know about, the kind of indigenous Japanese culture. So there was lots of really interesting material to work with. We sort of began the project planning around a performance, and as a studio that's done a number of these projects, we kind of set out our kind of concept around this sort of more sort of representation of the past, the present and the future. And through some conversations with Midori, she was particularly interested in this idea of a sort of tripartite state in which sort of archive is always, the past is always being kind of reconsidered from the present. So that was the kind of genesis of the project. And then the pandemic hit, and the whole project, I managed to get out to Japan, and I filmed all these locations in Japan that were connected to, I think we skipped a slide there. This seems to be doing something, yeah. Okay, there we go. So I kind of took all the archive, I think it was about 55 hours of different stuff and edited it into these sort of chapters based on the kind of concept that we had and we talked about. And then I went to Japan and I filmed all this new material in these different locations that I researched that were in these films and looking at different themes. So there was this sort of, always going to be this kind of juxtaposition of the past and the present with this idea that we would somehow represent the future. At that point I didn't really know what that was going to be. But so the project kind of went into this sort of status during the pandemic, and I started reading this book by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is a great book, and it's sort of about a kind of artificial intelligence who sort of slowly becomes kind of conscious of itself. And that started making me think about AI, and there was a lot of stuff about AI at that time. And another book that was passed to me was this book by Jacques Derrida, who's someone I'd read when I was studying, but I kind of hadn't gone back to him. He's such a sort of incomprehensible sort of poetry. But I did go back and read this. It's a short essay, and it's really interesting about archive itself, and asking this question about archive, and kind of what does it mean for us sort of psychologically to kind of constantly record and gather. And I thought that was the sort of question that I wanted to sort of try to lay out in the piece of work. Not necessarily just to make a piece about Japan, but to ask a question about what archive is and where archive might lead us. So that got me interested in this idea of sort of AI and machine learning, and how these algorithms will potentially in the future, or even now, are constantly mining information and making judgments on the past in the present. And that kind of got me into speaking to some different people I know who write software, thinking about biases that are built into these systems. I don't think I'm going to be getting in a driverless car because of that, because it's just bonkers what these things will kind of spot, and suddenly think a rock is a kind of antelope or a... So it's just interesting, like how these sort of coded kind of computer vision systems can spot things, and that's what I was sort of interested in. So that sort of came into the piece in this sort of delayed kind of time. We were thinking about turning into a film at the time, and then it turned into an installation. So we showed it in the BFI at the end of last year, and it came down in January this year, and I'll play a little bit of that, hopefully. Is there any sound? There we go. So yeah, that was an interesting kind of deconstruction of it as a sort of 90 or 80 minute long performance, and because it was in the lobby of the BFI, we really wanted it to sort of deconstruct sort of film. So there's lots of sort of stuff to do with how film is constructed through code, and we collaborate with some different people on some software that's been developed for kind of AI kind of editing tools. So there's some things that are happening above and below the main installation there. I'm going to quickly, because we don't have very long, there's a video of that piece that we've just made with the artist Hatius Nwat, who's on Erased Tapes, who we're hoping to do some more work with. So the project's kind of hoping to continue, and we want to make a feature doc collaborating with more Japanese artists. The other project I wanted to quickly mention is a thing called Re-Entanglements, which is a project I've been working on for about 4 years with an anthropologist called Paul Basu. Go and check it out. It's basically bringing together a material culture collection and sound recordings and loads of amazing photographs that were gathered in West Africa by this man called Northcote Thomas. And they've been kind of sitting in various archives and institutions, and Paul sort of brought them all back together, and kind of his idea is all rooted in this concept called kind of affordances. So this idea that most archives and collections and museums have this kind of latent kind of energy in them, and it's about kind of bringing them out and sharing them, but also sort of decolonising them, obviously. So yeah, I've been working with all these images for, as I say, about 3 years, creating different pieces of work, a short film called Faces Voices, which you can see a little bit, that went into this exhibition that happened at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge. And the exhibition brings together the artefacts, the photographs, the sound recordings, and then loads of artwork that's been commissioned from African artists in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. And in 2020 as well, just before the pandemic came, I was lucky enough to go with Paul to Nigeria to film some stuff. So we shot some stuff of one of the artists who's a ceramic artist, but then also we started a kind of journey into these particular they're called itchy marks, which you see on a lot of the, particularly on the men in these photographs. We started making a short film which has become a feature documentary, and then there was another set of films we made that also explored using a thing called style GANs, which are a form of AI-powered kind of animation, which I did by basically feeding a lot of these images into this model and kind of creating these sort of morphing sequences. So I'm sort of interested in AI, but I'm not an AI expert. I'm just sort of curious about it as a technology, how it's going to affect us, and how it might speak about kind of, I guess, the sort of gaze of the filmmaker, and also these kind of institutions. Like, I think for me, the whole journey of working with this stuff has been about learning about our kind of heritage, our colonial past, and sort of sort of looking at it in today, basically. So yeah, that's it really.
Thanks so much, Chris.
No problem.
We're going to move on to Désirée Reynolds, who is a writer, editor, creative writing workshop facilitator. And you're going to talk, you're now living in Sheffield from
Yes.
London, and you're going to talk about a couple of projects. One, I believe, is with Sheffield Archives.
Yes, so, that's too loud, isn't it? Hi everyone. I'm probably going to be touching a little bit on what you've just said, actually, because I want to talk a little bit about archiving whilst black. I think that thinking about archives and being from another place or having a heritage from elsewhere means that archiving can be a site of oppression. It can be a site of violence, and that's what we say about silence being the violence, and especially being in a different kind of minority, living in the north of England where there's less black people and less of that presence in the archive. So I'm going to talk about two projects that I'm doing, because forever we like to do more than one thing and drive ourselves crazy at the same time. So the first thing I want to talk about is the film that that I've hopefully now finished writing, which is an adaptation of a short story that I wrote called Born on Sunday Silent. So I was commissioned by a Manchester publisher to write a short story about Sheffield. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not from Sheffield, so I wanted to think about black presence pre the two wars. Knowing what I do know, my dad was I'm not a historian or an archivist, I'm a history nerd first and foremost. My dad was also a history nerd and told me about John Archer being the first black mayor of Battersea. And I think that started me off, and I thought he was too drunk when he said it to me, but actually he wasn't lying. There was a mayor back in 1918, I think, or 1917. And I went to the Sheffield General Cemetery here, which is a beautiful, beautiful old cemetery, old Victorian cemetery. And I asked, are there any people here from the Commonwealth, soldiers? Are there any black people, brown people? Can you help me? And they came up with a baby who was born here. She lived but 4 days, Kaya Kusia Mansa, who was part of a travelling Ashanti village. Now this village was quite, it travelled around a lot. It went to London, it went to Scarborough, and it was a mock village. And they say Ashanti, we don't know. We know about the fact that, again, archiving is a site of violence, and so therefore, were they Ashanti, were they not Ashanti, was this her name, was this not her name? It's always quite grey when we talk about those sorts of histories, especially those histories based in England. So I wrote the short story of Kaya Kusimansa, called it Born on Sunday Silent, and that she was born here, died after 4 days, and then her mum and her family had to leave her buried here whilst they went on to travel around the rest of the country. And it touched me quite a lot, and I wondered about Kai. I thought about her a lot, and I think when we think about archives, we should think about hauntings, really, and who's haunting who. And I thought, actually, Kai can't quite let me go, so I wrote the short story, and then was approached to adapt her into, I'm talking about her, like her, adapt the short story into a script, which I'm now working with Becky on, and we have got some funding, and the BFI have funded us. We want more, obviously, more money always is good, but we are now making that into a short film, the story of Kai in the cemetery. And so that's one of my one of many projects. And so through Kai, I think, she gave me an opportunity to work with the Sheffield Archives, who they were in Sheffield. For those of us that aren't from here and don't live here, the discussion or the decolonising of the archive, and that's a bit of a dodgy term, and we can debate that at some point later on if you'd like. But the decolonising of the Sheffield Archive is a really long time coming. It's fits and starts. You mentioned when you said come and have a chat about the challenges. One of the challenges here in Sheffield Archive is that they're actually all just nerdy librarians who are great. But there's the archive here isn't allowed a website. Like, how mental is that? It's not allowed a website. It has to be underneath the Sheffield Council. It's under libraries. We know what's happening in this country to libraries, and therefore the archives are suffering as much as the libraries are. So those are the challenges. The challenge, again, I'm talking about the archive has been a space of violence where you go into an archive and you're trying to find yourself, really. I think anybody that delves into the archives they're really just looking for themselves. And when you go to an archive that doesn't have you in it, doesn't have your family in it, doesn't have anybody that looks like you in it, then that is a violence. And we have yet to really think about what that means, I think. You can talk to me about it later if you want, another challenge. So my other project with the archive, so I kind of went to the archive, stomping around, why isn't this here, why isn't that there? I know that we're in this archive, just where is it? How do you document it? How do you label it? We have, archives are history gatekeepers. The archive is meant to be a site of collective memory, but whose memory? Who's doing the collecting? Who's doing the labeling? And who has access? So your point about the university, which is a hugely extractive force in this city anyway, I don't mind being controversial, in this city anyway, hugely extractive force of communities, so communities then distrust the archive, right? Which is something that you both mentioned. So then I complained quite a lot, as I do, and the archive said, well, why don't you come and be a writer in residence here? And I was like, oh, damn, now I've got to do the work. So yes, I kind of taught myself into the situation, which I always do. So I started off an initiative then called Dig Where You Stand. I stole it from Sven Lindqvist, who was, or referenced it if you're middle class, I referenced it, who was a huge force for change, and talked about the archives as being a place where we know what happens in the archives, and that everything is actually there, we just have to have the courage to look. And I thought, I love that idea. So the Dig Where You Stand movements, or it was called Knowledge from the Ground Up, which is like a hugely communist idea of knowledge. Yeah, that's problematic in itself. But they wanted to look at, say, the Nazis' history in Germany, and also a workers' movement started out of that, looking at where money came from, which I think the history of money and economics is something that, as a member of the diaspora, is very, very important to me. So Dig Where You Stand became an artist collective here. See another project, Black Artists Collective in Sheffield, where I wanted us to be able to respond to the archive, but through art. Because we couldn't really respond to it in terms of facts. And what do we mean by facts, even in the first place? What do we mean by the truth, actually, or history? I mean, this is all meta, but it's important if you're thinking about, again, archival violence. So Dig Where You Stand has somehow morphed into an artistic movement. We are in the process of getting more money, never enough, but more to commission more artists to do more work to respond to those silences in the archive, and to, as you said, bring it out. So I curated an exhibition which went to the market, which is great. Markets are, I was just talking about Brixton Market today actually, but markets are an amazing place. We had the exhibition in the market. So people would walk up to it, have a look and go, oh right, whilst they're buying, you know, their meat, fish and whatever. And I feel like, well, curating and putting art, you know, I think, I can't remember if it was Trotsky said, take the art out of the galleries and put it on the streets. So I wanted to do that. That was very difficult. Sheffield Council didn't like the idea of me putting posters everywhere, so we had to find venues. And the Central Library and a couple of other libraries. So it briefly toured, and it went into the cemetery as well. And there's another event coming up about Dig Where You Stand in the cemetery, coming up on the 12th of November, I think. And I'm happy to talk to you all more about that. So I'm not going to whitter on too long.
You're going to show your clip?
I am actually, so thank you. So one of the things that I found in, so that's what I was going to do. So one of the things I found in the archive, a few very important stories. So the reason why, I mean, I know this is probably, I find it incredible that we even have to say it out loud, but finding these black and brown stories in this archive, in this very northern place, is important because we were always here as black and brown people. There was never a point that we weren't here. And the idea that we weren't here gives rise to a certain kind of nationalism which is on the rise right now, just to let you all know. I mean, I think you've all watched the news. The far right is on the rise, that sense of nationalism is increasing, and the idea that somehow borders and being exclusionary, I find very, very dangerous, particularly frightening, and I feel like the work in the archive connects to that in a very important way. And it's not necessarily about me at all, but that we continue to do that work. So one of the stories I found was of Thomas Pompey, who, the only reason why I found him in the archives is through some baptismal records, was because he was the godson of a marquis, so royalty connected, therefore he's in the archive, right? So here we have another set of violence right there. And he was 14 and from Guinea in 1724 in Rotherham. So as far as I can tell, he's the oldest black person that I found from this area. I know there's more. I'm very, very determined that there's more. Well, they say he's 14. Was he? Because we know about adultification and the way that black and brown children are made older than they actually are. Was he 14? We don't know. Because of the time, 1724, 1725, I'm wondering if it was about him being an ornament in one of those paintings, you know, the paintings of kind of the lady of the manor pretending to be a milkmaid whilst there's an exotic boy that she's leaning on, or something like that. I wonder if he was brought over for that reason. I can't find him. Again, I'm being haunted. He has, because he's the godson of the Marquis, they have massive houses. They have houses all over the country. Could he have been taken here? Could he have been taken there? I haven't managed to find anything about his burial or marriage, nothing like that, but I'm still looking for Thomas, and I probably always will. So now going on to a clip that I found from the BFI. Thanks, BFI. I don't think I've paid them yet. What I found was, what's great about being the public face of an archive is that people send you stuff. I got sent a picture of some black miners yesterday from the 30s, which is great. I got sent this information. I hunted it down, and it's of a black girl in 1901. So the travelling village was 1902. And this clip is from 1901 at the BFI. It's a Mitchell and Kenyon film. You know Mitchell and Kenyon films where they try and show you happy workers, ha ha ha. I tried to dig a bit more about Mitchell and Kenyon. I think they ended up charging people to see themselves. I think it was actually a bit of a scam. Do you know that? Do you think is that true? Ah, okay, that's interesting. So Mitchell and Kenyon travel around, happy workers, then say, we've got your picture, we've got your image, come and watch it, and we'll charge you how much money for it. So it was a scam all along. In this little clip, I found this little black girl who's haunting who I sort of put her on Instagram, and everybody was like, we want her, we love her, who is she? I only asked Nigel to do this for me just a few seconds ago, so I'm going to get Nigel to play you this BFI little clip of this little girl, and then maybe we'll have a little chat, and then I'll finish. So in this clip, if it decides to work, there's also, you can actually spot a few black workers coming out of here as well. Oh, there you go, excellent, thank you, Nigel. Like I say, 1901, I watched this with my mum, which was fantastic. She was like, sit in there he is, look at that. And it made her feel like she's a part of the story. And I thought that's the important thing about the archives. Anyway, so we're going to come to...
And it's Sheffield, isn't it, Dee?
Yes, sorry, I'm not sure. Thank you, Becky. Yes, it's Sheffield. This is called the Brown's Atlas Works in 1901. And you can see there's a guy in a top hat. What is he doing? He's directing people to come and look. I'm going to have to get up and show you now. And here is my girl here. Can you see her? Right? Yeah, let's do that. Let's pause it so we can look at her a little bit. Oh, it's a bit blurry. Sorry about that. I should have sorted this out a bit better. But as you can see, there she is. 1901 in Sheffield. Who is she? Where is she? How did she get there? So I went into the archives and I dug up ordnance maps. We looked for orphanages, schools, workhouses. Couldn't find her. I'm still looking, obviously, because I'm tenacious. But the fact that she was here in 1901 means that she could still have relatives or descendants here right now, couldn't she?
And Mitchell and Kenyon, they travelled the whole country and filmed all, scenarios all over. So there might be more in other cities all over the country.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's quite a lot, the Mitchell and Kenyon films online actually on the BFI website.
Yeah, they're free. Getting a clip of them isn't, but they are just viewing the amazing footage that they have, and just a quick kind of an aside, really thinking about decolonising the archive and how we present archives. There's a few archive stuff at the BFI that has a lot of blackface on it, and I emailed them, because it's like a village fates with somebody in a bone, in 18 whatever, and someone's got a bone through their nose and a woolly wig, and I emailed them and I said, you know what, you need to maybe just say that, some of these clips are problematic. And
again, it's the labelling, the metadata, and that's
right. I don't think they did that. They ignored me, and that's what we're talking about, again, another violence when approaching this kind of work.
And the metadata and the labelling is also something that funnels, it guides people in what they look at or what they don't look at.
Well, we'll also have a resource here called Picture Sheffield, and the archivists were all like, oh my gosh, this work is incredible, but how awful and saddening. But Picture Sheffield, you put in words, you have to put in a word to find a picture. So you're like, what do I look for? Do I have to put in coloured? Do I have to put in Negro? Do I have to put in, in order for these things to come up? And as I say, every tap of the laptop button is another violence, and I think that's something that's important to say out loud.
Absolutely. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Brilliant.
Moving on to our last speaker, we've got Mandy Wigby, who's a musician, composer, been in many different bands, and you're going to talk about a few projects. One, which I believe was British Council FAMLAB project.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
Yeah, hi everybody, good to see everyone. In about 2018, myself and artist and filmmaker Di Mainstone, we've been working together, and we were talking about the suffragettes quite a lot, and then we thought, next year they're going to be celebrating the Vote 100 centenary, so we really wanted to kind of do something to honour.
2018.
Yeah, in 2018 we wanted to make some films or to create some stunts or something like they would have done. Obviously we weren't, they went through so much, but we wanted to see what it was like to kind of do it under the gaze of the city. So we did some little exploratory kind of experiments with shoving kind of. We made this flag, this suffragette flag, and pushed it into letterboxes. And
Can I just ask you, just for the international audience,
Yeah.
just to say a little bit about the suffragettes?
oh, sorry, yeah, the suffragettes. So they were a group of women led by Emily Pankhurst, who basically were fighting for women's rights. There was no rights for women at all. There was no vote, and this was in the early 1900s. So it was 100 years later we came and thought, actually at the time, not all women got the vote anyway. It was women over 30 who, I think, owned property, yeah. And there were many kind of working class women who were being disowned by their families and, husbands, and yeah, it was, and obviously brutalised by the police. And so I'll show some footage that we used. We ended up using, what we did was we made a series of four films, and the first one we made this flag, and we kind of dragged it around London outside the bank over all the statues of these stone-faced statues of kind of, men, and we dragged it all over there, and
in our mind, our exploratory process was this is the woman's story. We're picking up women's spirits from the city, and we're kind of taking them with us on a journey. And each film would be, a further journey, collecting more voices for equality for women. So the first. I mean, we managed to do this in the bank underground. We were pulling this 30-metre flag up the bank, and people asking us to move on. And on International Women's Day, we hooked this suffragette colours around Lloyd David, who was the Prime Minister at the time, who said he would help suffragettes, but he didn't. So of course that angered them. And if they were now, we just thought they would have been using every kind of social media. They were so ingenious the way they got their message across. So they would have been using everything to sort of focus their intent. So the second